today's webinar. I'm your host, Nicole Sienna, and I'm here today with Giga Metals. They are a Canadian mineral exploration and development company focused on the critical battery metals space. The company's flagship Turnagain project, Northern BC, ranks amongst the world's largest underdeveloped nickel cobalt sulphide resources. So to take us through some of the latest updates here and more project details, I'm here with Mark Jarvis, President and Director, and Scott Lindrum, CEO and Director. Welcome, guys.
Nice to see you.
Hey, Nicole. Yeah, it's a
to
pleasure.
see you both. So before I get off screen here, I just want a few housekeeping items for our live audience. You can put your questions into the chat box on the screen. I see some of you doing that already. We're going to give the guys the stage here, and then we'll come back to those questions at the end of their presentation. For anyone watching the replay, however, please remember you can head over to gigametals.com and click on the contact page. There you can book a meeting or get in touch. So there's plenty of options for the broadcast afterwards as well. So to get things really started here, Scott, you are new to the team in the last 12 months or so, 2025. Why don't you take us through what made you decide to get involved with the company?
Excellent, Nicole. And thanks very much, Nicole and John. And thanks everyone for attending. Yeah, that's a great segue, Nicole. So just by background, I joined Giga Metals in July of 2025 after a couple months talking to Mark. And I come from a background of investment banking, solely focused on mining and metals. So that's the frame in which I looked at this opportunity to work with Mark and the team. And when Mark and I started talking, I knew of Giga and it was a great company, but what really attracted me was all the elements that Mark had put into place. And that's a great way to introduce what Giga is and what Giga will be going forward, we think. And first and foremost among those, it would be an asset. I mean, a great mining company is underpinned by a quality asset. We are fortunate with Turnagain in having, as Nicole mentioned, one of the largest undeveloped nickel projects in the world, certainly one of the largest in North America. And it's a great project in a great jurisdiction. We put out a PFS in 2023, which highlights just what we have now, a 30+ year mine life, produce an open pit mine, low strip ratio, producing a very good, clean nickel con of 18%. That we can sell essentially across the globe if we'd like. And Mark, maybe in a minute, I'll ask you to sort of bring up some of the history of Turnagain, but that was sort of, for me, the underpinning of this story. And I think that's what all great mining development companies are underpinned by, having an asset. And then, as Nicole mentioned, Mark's on the phone as well. Mark has been with the company over 20 years now, Mark.
Yes, since 2004.
2004. So Mark definitely predates me in this endeavor, but knows the project inside and out, and has been really the driving force to get this from exploration to PFS and beyond. Alongside Mark is really and perhaps not praised enough, as our technical team, which includes our project manager Greg Ross, and as well Lyle Tritton and Martin Vidra, who are our chief technical personnel here. They are ex-Sherritt individuals, have a wealth of knowledge across nickel mining, processing, and marketing. So they are really the underpinning on the technical side for us as we push this forward. They have great relationships across Canada and across the world from their Sherritt days, and we bring them in as needed to help with those elements of the project. Someone who's not on our website but should definitely get a mention is Ed Beswick, who leads our effort with First Nations and government relations. I believe, Mark, he was the Minister of Mines for Northern BC, or had a role in the supervisory role with mines in BC for a lot of years.
Yeah, no, he was the mines inspector for Northern BC for a number of years. And so he knows everybody up north.
Yeah, so he's a wealth of knowledge and experience for us, and is really great. I believe he was in Victoria recently at the mining day there. He's, like I said, a wealth of experience in dealing with multi-levels of government, as well as the First Nations. And as an underpinning of the story, another element that I viewed as very critical to coming in was that engagement with First Nations. As many of us know, and probably most of the people on this call know, that is a critical element to developing any project, particularly in British Columbia. As it stands now, we have two primary First Nations we work with, the Tahltan and the Cascadena. Both are very sophisticated, commercial, very, very supportive of mining in the region. They see the potential of Turnagain, as well as other projects, frankly. And they've been very supportive. We use them almost year-round at our site. And and support them in their community endeavors with sports programs, etc. So where we can, we help them, and we certainly rely on them for work up in northern BC. The Tahltan in particular are very commercial. They recently, as many will have noticed, were part of a consortium buying the Stewart bulk terminal in northern BC. So they view the region as we do, as a sort of a hotbed for development, and it's great that they're alongside with us. And I'll ask Mark maybe to chime in a little bit. We'll get to Mitsubishi in a moment, but another underpinning, and this really caught my eye as a banker coming into this company, was that the agreement and the relationship that Mark had forged with Mitsubishi Corp, which is one of the largest companies in the world. They are very familiar trading metals, trading various commodities, in fact, and developing projects. And from my experience as a banker, I know that Mitsubishi Corp does not enter into agreements like these lightly. They do a vast amount of due diligence, both technical, social, and financial. So to see them involved prior to me joining was a massive vote of confidence for me, and a vote of confidence in Mark and the team in being able to get them to the table and reach an agreement. They largely funded the PFS, I believe, Mark. So that's a great endorsement for the project. And they continue to be a great partner. And maybe, Mark, at this moment, maybe we can talk about the background and how that came about, and then I can continue.
Well, as you say, Scott, they do due diligence. It took 3 years, and probably a year of that was truly intensive due diligence. So they wouldn't have gotten involved unless they believed it could get through, for example, an environmental assessment. Yeah. Something very important in Mitsubishi Corp is reputational risk. And so they don't want to get involved in something that could be perceived as, not helpful to the environment, non-ESG. The, relationships with the First Nations are critical to them. They're very heavy investors in British Columbia in an LNG project in the north. And it was, we went through an incredibly detailed due diligence with them, and we passed. And it's a wonderful thing because they're a wonderful partner.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and since joining, I can certainly speak to that. They've been great welcoming me into the company, as well as working alongside Mark and I to take this into 2026. And then maybe just from a macro perspective, it's great to see that Canada in particular is focusing on secure critical minerals domestically. I think it's frankly long overdue, and to pull supply away from the Chinese sphere of influence, and British Columbia has been leading the forefront on that, which is fantastic. As we internally call it, there's a bit of an ecosystem developing in northern British Columbia with power, infrastructure, and mining opportunities, which is only going to help us. So this is really what attracted me to the company and where we stand now. As I mentioned, I joined about 6 months ago. We've had a busy 6 months, I think you'd agree, Mark, in moving forward here. And it's going to be even busier 2026. So it's great to be in this position. And and that's where we stand now. Mark, if you wouldn't mind maybe moving a slide ahead, we can touch on the pathway. So this is a bit of a new message for us, I think you'd agree, Mark, that so the story for us going forward, really last 6 months and going forward is a dual path structure for us. On the one hand, we've got Turnagain. It's a PFS level nickel cobalt project, and we've sung its praises. It's among the largest in the world, and it really underpins the value of this company and the long-term value creation that we can offer shareholders. As a relatively new aside to that, we have an exploration focus, which is driving the work we've done most recently, and this will be evidenced in the geophysics work we've done, but also is going to lead the bulk of our activity in 2026. And that's exploration, and that would be particularly focused on the attic zone, which is separate but close by the existing PFS pit that's envisioned for the Turnagain project. This is a younger system of rocks, and it was really the genesis of bringing in a consultant, I believe late last year, Mark, Dr. Steve Beresford. So we've got a dual-pronged approach here. It's clear. It's important to note that these are not separate paths distinctly. They're both focused on the same areas, so it's not a diversion of our attention away from the key project. We view the work on the attic zone in particular as adding to the story of the project, and we can talk about that in greater detail. But really, for us going into 2026, our path to value creation for our stakeholders en masse would be pursuing a dual track strategy where we search for, keep turning and advancing at a slower burn, and focus on our efforts on the exploration. Many of on the call will note that we did raise some money recently, so we are funded for the first contemplated program of the new year, which is part of track 2. And that's going to drive the bulk of our news flow and activity into the new year, and we're very excited about that. Mark, if you wouldn't mind, maybe we can touch on BC quickly. The next slide, unless there's anything you'd like to add, Mark, on this.
Well, I guess what I would add is that we came out with our PFS, and I think probably the elephant in the room that should be addressed is that the price of nickel then went down, and it's being overproduced by Indonesia. I mean, most nickel producers are losing money, so it's a hard time to move a large nickel project ahead, and so about a year ago, in November of 24, I reached out to Dr. Stephen Beresford because I knew who he was, and he's an exploration mind that I really admire, and I asked him to review all of our data. We've got so much data we've got about $60 million worth of data on this property, and to review it with an eye for finding high grade within the system. And it's a really large system that we think we've explored maybe 20% of volumetrically. So we brought him on, and then this whole idea of exploring for copper within this ultramafic complex was Dr. Beresford's. So that's kind of the history of that.
Yeah, and Mark, if I could add to that, it also that focus on copper in particular and the attic zone as a new feature for us is really helping us drive those discussions with potential partners in terms of large mining groups and private equity types. So it's really worked well for us in advancing Turnagain as a standalone project, but it offers so much upside for us. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the leverage, if you could discover a high grade copper deposit within this Turnagain complex would be just amazing. So
yeah, exactly. So the next slide is British Columbia. I'm sure many on the call will be familiar with British Columbia. It's obviously a great jurisdiction for mining. We're located in the northwest, just to the east of the Newmont operated Red Chris mine. There are several other projects in the region. It's actually become a little bit of a locus of activity in recent years, which is fantastic. Mark, I would maybe ask you to speak a bit about British Columbia, but I just might want to add that in recent months, I think we've seen, as I touched on earlier, the real sort of upswell of activity in northern BC, and that relates to all facets that would impact mining development, from power, road development, other infrastructure elements, and then mining developments. I mean, Red Chris was flagged by the federal government as being a critical project, as was the Kitimat LNG facility. So there's a very good tailwind behind us in the region. And Mark, maybe if you'd like to, as a resident of Vancouver, it might be more poignant for you to touch on the BC relationship.
Sure. Well, the wind is in our sails, both federally and and provincially. Yeah. And so, one of the critical projects listed by Prime Minister Mark Carney was the North Coast transmission line, which will be doubling the power delivery across the province to Prince Rupert. And then from there, the next step is to take the power line up Highway 37 to the Yukon. And that's undergoing a feasibility study right now that's being funded by the province. And so that power line, I mean, in our PFS, we've got it modeled that we pay for 100% of the cost of that power line. And it's a big chunk of our capital expenditures in the PFS. Well, it looks like, there's a very good possibility that we won't be paying for that the government will be bringing in that infrastructure. And, the federal government also has infrastructure funding for, all sorts of things to do with supporting critical minerals development. And the infrastructure that they talk about is things like power lines and roads. So, we've got a road in from Highway 37 into our property but it needs work before it'll be a road capable of supporting an operating mine. And that's all kind of on the table. That kind of support isn't just talk; it's money, and all of that helps very much with the payback, with the capex, and with the financials of this project.
Yeah, and the benefit to us is that as a smaller company, we don't bear the capital cost of much of that, but we do benefit from the regional activity. So having that tail behind us is going to be critical for us going forward, and it's great to see. And I think it's only going to be improving for us going into the next couple of years, I'd say, Mark.
I'd say so.
Yeah, exactly. Mark, if you wouldn't, yeah. So we touched on this a bit earlier. And this is another critical part of this story for us. And Mark's talked about the genesis of this a bit, but having Mitsubishi involved for us, and for me in particular, coming from the financial side of the mining world, was incredibly important. As Mark mentioned, they do a tremendous amount of due diligence. They do not get involved in projects lightly, and they work well to make not only their partners better, but the joint ventures that they're in better. So they've been a great partner and a great steward along the way. We speak to them routinely every week, as a matter of fact. So they're intimately involved in what we're doing. And they are as well helping us and pushing us to bring in a partner or many partners potentially for this project. And one of the benefits for us is that the groups that we are speaking to about coming in as a potential partner to this, or one of many, is that Mitsubishi either has worked or does work with these groups around the world. So there's a great synergy between us, our partner Mitsubishi, and the groups that we're talking to. This is only upside for us as we push Turnagain forward and bring those partners into the fold. So.
Yeah, and on that note, Scott, I mean, Mitsubishi's model is they don't want to build the mine, they don't want to operate the mine, but they want to be a partner in the mine. They want to be anywhere from 15 to 25% working interest partner at the end of the day, and so that's very much their model. And so they're very helpful in introducing us to large companies at the highest level.
Yeah,
and I can't speak highly enough about the whole corporate culture is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, and then their track record across the world with those groups just speaks volumes and really just adds to us as a skill set. So it's been fantastic, and we expect it to continue as such. So yeah. This is a reserve statement. This was released as part of the PFS. So as the viewers will see, it's again a very large system, low grade nickel and cobalt, but a very straightforward operation. I mean, this is available in the PFS, which is available on our website, as well as in our corporate presentation online. I don't know if we need to spend too much time on this, Mark, but if you want to.
Nope. Take. If I can lead off on this slide.
Sure, yeah, please do.
So those reserves are referenced in the PFS slide are in this area outlined in green. And then the area that we call the attic zone is a different, it's part of the same ultramafic complex, but it's a different pulse from several million years later from, they think, the same source, but it's completely different rocks. And as you can see, we did a geochemical survey across this complex, and you can see for copper, and you can see where where it is. It's more than 2 kilometers long by about 2 kilometers wide. And it's just anomalous to fairly high in copper for soils, across this whole area. And that's the area that Dr. Stephen Beresford pointed out as having potential for what he calls Volkovsky style, massive copper and magnetite type deposits. And Volkovsky is a Russian mine, a Russian copper mine in the Uralian belt, which, according to Dr. Beresford, shares a lot of similarities with this belt of ultramafic intrusives that we have in BC and up into the Alaskan. They're called Alaskan-style ultramafic complexes. So this is where we did our geophysical lines this fall, and we started with 2 of them, and it's really quite interesting. I'll just move to the next slide. Is it okay if I kind of take off with this a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Please do. Yeah, of course.
Okay. So because I find this really interesting. The MT was chosen because it measures resistivity, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds here. And I'm not a geophysicist, I'm not a geologist, but I have spent some time in the business listening to geologists and geophysicists. The contrast in resistivity between the ultramafic intrusive and the surrounding rocks is very sharp. And so it proved in this environment to be the best tool to actually map out the sort of geometry of the ultramafic system. And it just worked extremely well. And so what we can see is that the ultramafic system is in place. It's in its original configuration, in other words, facing upward. And so the implication is we've got untested basal contacts, and we've got the side contacts are mostly untested. So we've got a lot of, those are the places where you can expect to find higher grade, more massive sulphides. So it just worked really well. This is line 1. Line 2 shows a little more complexity than we were expecting, and it shows us some features that we didn't know were there. Like this feature of lower resistivity sticking up in the middle, and lower resistivity, roughly you can translate that into higher conductivity. We didn't know that feature was there. And in fact, we had a drill hole just by chance that came quite close to it, but didn't touch that feature. So we
knocked on the door, as they say, Mark.
And this is something we need to know a lot more about, and it's quite interesting. So because of the success of this program, and because it clearly shows that this idea of the contrast in resistivity between the ultramafic intrusive and the surrounding rocks is so sharp that it makes it easy to map. So I'll just go back to this one. We're going to put in more lines, both to the north and to the south of those 2 lines. We're going to process those, and then we're going to, using that information, decide where to do ground-based electromagnetic surveys, EM surveys, to sort of rank or prioritize our drill targets. And this is critical, and this is Beresford's sort of very methodical approach, is you've got this huge search space. And so you need to find a cost-effective way to narrow the search and prioritize your targets. And so that's what we're doing.
Yeah, and Mark, if I could, that's a great way to characterize it, as methodical.
Yes.
As a smaller company, we do not have unlimited budgets for things like this. So the program that Mark just spoke about was a relatively modest program, which we started in August and took into October. That was less than $500,000. We're funded for what Mark has described in terms of the additional MT lines and EM into 2026 and in the spring. But I also would say, Mark, that this thought process is evolving, and we may end up having a revised plan shortly that would be larger than this. But because some of the groups that we're talking to have reviewed some of this information and have thoughts on this, so as it stands now, we've got a great program planned. But where we can afford the opportunity to expand that if we'd like, and so we're well funded for what we have. But it's almost the sky's the limit in terms of what we could do here. So.
And if I can just comment too, I mean, one of the strengths of bringing Scott on board is that, from his 20-year career as a banker in the mining business, he knows a lot of people, and he's got the respect of a lot of people. So we've had 2 meetings recently with large entities, and in both of them, there was 5 geologists from their side sitting in the meeting, and that to me indicates a level of interest. And I can tell you, they seem to very much appreciate this methodical approach. Dr. Beresford has a lot of respect within the community, and that came across as well. So, we're looking for some help from some bigger entities to really sort of crack this exploration nut. And there seems to be real interest. These things don't happen overnight, but I can tell you, Scott has been able to get us in front of people, that I simply couldn't.
Thanks, Mark. And I think so. As the slide, as our cap structure, fairly straightforward. We are well positioned in this respect. We've got a fairly tight cap stack, despite the share price being where it is. But it gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of raising proceeds, which we will probably eventually have to do at some point. But this is the high level in terms of our share count and options out. I think this might be the last slide, Mark.
It is the last slide.
Yeah. So Nicole, that's us more or less in a nutshell. And it's, as Mark alluded to, we're going to have a busy 2026 planned. The work programs are sort of being developed now, and we'll be ready to go in the spring. And yeah, it should be a great year, and we expect not only developments on the exploration front, but also on the corporate side as well. So it'll be a very busy but very productive year. I am confident that this time next year, if we have this kind of discussion, it'll be a different conversation and much more exciting. So.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. That was a great update. We have some comments already coming in, like I'd mentioned before. I do want to kick things off with talking about your dual path strategy. And I think this will help address some of the questions in the chat about higher stock price, more shareholder value. Let's just talk a little bit about how those two paths, again, exploration path and long-term project path, are supporting each other as you gather data. Can you address just the shareholder value with that?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so we look at it from this perspective, Nicole, that the exploration focus, particularly in the attic zone, is complementary and additive to the work we've already done on the Turnagain PFS pit and all the work that, and as Mark alluded to, the millions of dollars that have been spent taking us to pre-feasibility study on that. So now as it shapes up, and we don't know to the extent of what the system looks like. We know it's there, but we have yet to test it thoroughly. As we mentioned, we've only done a small geophysics program. So we could be looking at an addition to the existing plan for Turnagain. It could be a smaller starter pit or a small mine. I guess really the door is open for what we can do. Mark, if you want to add any color, please do. But it's really additive and complementary to what we've got at Turnagain. So.
It's always the case that if you've got a large but low-grade open pitable style of deposit, which is very much like a copper porphyry, what's best is if you can have a higher grade starter pit, or even a high grade underground mine to kind of kick things off, and that's where the leverage is. And so that's what we're looking for. We're not looking for more low grade. We know we can find more low grade. We know where it is. We haven't drilled it off, but we know where it is. You could keep going with the low grade stuff and drill off 100-year mine life, we think, 200 years, or we haven't done it, can't prove it, but that's what we all think. But that doesn't really do anything if until you get the project off the ground. If you can get a smaller but high grade, high value mine going, that can absolutely leverage everything else. And so that's why it's critical. That could change the entire game here.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
A question
from reshape
David.
The entire project as well.
Yep.
Thanks, guys. A question from David just came in. Giga did a couple private placements this year. What is the estimate for how long you can go before another?
I'd say, we're well funded into the spring at this point, Nicole. I'd say that's conservative, and with the discussions we're having with various groups, I think we've got longer lead time than that, but at least until the spring or middle of next year, based on that. And in terms of exploration dollars, the work that we've talked about is already well funded, and the money is in place. So we've got no shortage of money to keep us going. So.
Okay, good news. I do want to address a question from Ken. He did bring up previous talks with Tesla. He said he's been holding it ever since. What kind of interest are you seeing from strategic partners, maybe downstream? Is there anything you want to talk about on that front?
Can I take that one, Scott?
Yeah, please, Mark. Yeah, absolutely. Please do.
Yeah, we were, things were quite hot for a while until about 2 years ago. And we had discussions going with several car companies and battery companies as well. And in fact, one car company in particular, a European premium car company, we were quite a long ways down the path. I was actually starting to get kind of hopeful about it, that they would join as a partner under the same model as Mitsubishi. But then the price of nickel went down, and the legacy car companies that were getting into the EV business were just losing money like crazy. And so that went away. And to be frank, if they were smart, they would be looking right now, well, the price of nickel is cheap, because the timeline for development is quite long with large projects. And it would be the right time to be doing it. But, I don't run a large car company, and they don't really care what I think.
I want to talk a little bit more about how you're positioning yourself in the nickel supply. You did, Mark, mention everything within the Indonesian supply chain. What's setting you guys apart? What's your strategy?
Mark, do you want to lead off and I'll back off?
Oh, you go ahead, Scott.
No, I mean, in terms of positioning, Nicole, for us, I mean, we look at this, our situation is such that we can't control what Indonesia does, and we can't control what some of the groups that control the Indonesians do. But we view Turnagain as a pivotal project for Canada and for the Western world in terms of secure, responsible, clean nickel. And that's how we are approaching it. That's how we frame it. And we think that's increasingly getting an audience with both government level people as well as international groups. I think we'd like to see more of a shift away from an Asian sphere of influence in the nickel market, and we're not alone in this position, but that's how we view Turnagain on the global market of nickel projects. And I think you're seeing with some of the issues that the Indonesian groups are having with not only political problems but environmental issues. I think those are coming to the fore, and those will be increasingly more critical on them in that respect. And I think we're well positioned longer term to realize the potential gap in nickel supply that comes from that.
Right. Okay. A question here from Alex.
Oh, don't get me started on this.
Sorry, go ahead, Nicole. Pardon me.
Yeah. I just think, when you look at what's going on in Indonesia, if I can be really blunt, it's abysmal. All the car companies get their nickel basically from Indonesia, and yet they all talk about being interested in ESG. Well, they're polluting the water supplies of the villagers, or they're cutting down tropical rainforests, they're destroying coral reefs. You can't think that you're buying an electric vehicle and you're saving the world. You're not. You're participating in all of this ugly activity that's going on in Indonesia. Sooner or later, that's got to change. And when it does, we're competing in the Western world with Indonesia, but we have to, have environmental standards. We have to respect, indigenous rights, and we should. I'm not saying that these are bad things, but it makes it, it's harder to compete with a jurisdiction that just ignores all of that.
Mm-hmm. And you guys are located in northern BC. We have a question from David wondering if there will be a lull on site work due to winter weather.
Yes, typically.
Yeah, there will. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, there's a bit of a lag here, I think.
No, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
We do our exploration when the snow goes away. In northern BC, it's actually, if you've got a mine up and running, an open pit mine up and running, wintertime is a good time to run a mine. It makes it much more efficient because the ground is frozen and hard. But for exploration, it's better to have the snow out of the way. So we're not going to be doing much until May or so.
Okay, so that addresses.
Nicole, I would add to that. Mm-hmm. Sorry. I would add to that, Nicole, that site activity is not the only activity that we're engaged in right now. And we look at the winter season that may not be accessible for site as a great time for us to advance partnership discussions and other corporate initiatives that we have. So it will not be a quiet time for us. It just may be quiet in terms of geophysics or drilling. So.
Okay, awesome. So we're looking at the spring for major updates from Attic. Is that what we're aiming here?
Yeah.
Okay. So
I'd say that's fair. Yeah.
Okay. So you guys have done your geophysical work at the attic zone. We know that it's close to the PFS pit at Turnagain. How have these results changed or sharpened your understanding of the broader Turnagain intrusive complex?
That's a pretty yeah. Go ahead, Mike. That's a very very geological question, I think. So.
Well, and again, I'm not a geologist, but I've been living with this project for 20 years. So it changes everything, actually. Stephen Beresford came and looked at all the data with fresh eyes. And unlike previous modeling of this deposit, he decided it looked like it was upright and that it wasn't rolled over onto its side, as some previous geologists had assumed. It's always based on incomplete data when you make a model as a geologist. But that difference in orientation changes everything, because it's not just the copper. Also in the nickel areas, the plumbing is still in place. And so it's in the constrictions of the magma flow where the massive sulfides tend to drop out. And those targets are still in place underneath this kind of low-grade cloud. So, not just for copper, but also for nickel. We're focused on the copper right now because it's really interesting and it could be a game changer for us. And it's nice to diversify your, the metals you produce. But there's also, it totally opens it up for high-grade nickel exploration.
Okay, so Alex here was just looking for confirmation. Are there PGs in the attic zone as well as copper?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah. So with us looking into the spring, and we know that for 2026, attic is going to be the bulk of activity that you guys had mentioned for the new year. What does a successful next field season look like for you folks in the area?
Well, I mean, Nicole, I would say that a successful program for us would be further understanding what we've just discovered basically through this round of geophysics. And as I pointed, it is early days in that respect. And Mark, please feel free to jump in. But really, this is going to shape our understanding of that system, both in terms of width and breadth, but also at depth. And as Mark pointed out, it is quite a deep system. Fortunately, we do have some idea where the bottom is, which is actually a positive for us right now. So that really, the name of the game now, Nicole, is to just better understand that. That will take us through into a more advanced program, which would involve drilling. So, but for us, the important thing is to do it in that sort of step fashion where we have really defined targets, as opposed to, taking a chance that we don't hit. It's like we really want to do this the right way and in a responsible way. So that's going to be the focus. But yeah, further understanding of the system is going to be priority number one for us.
Mark, anything to add?
No, I think Scott summed that up.
Okay.
Excellent.
Now on the line, we do have some existing shareholders. They're saying they've been long-term holders. I'd said that before. For anyone new to the story, and Scott, your entry into the company as well is changing things, but what do you think the market is really missing about the story right now?
What's it really missing about this? That's a great question, and it's admittedly one that we wrestle with every day, frankly. I think the nickel market tends to be a shadow that looms large for us, just in general. And part of the responsibility that we have is to get our story out in particular, and when we're doing that, I think the biggest impediment right now, though, is the nickel market, and I think it's a bit of a baby with the bathwater situation. What we do like to stress, though, with groups who are potentially looking to work with us or invest in us is that, and to Mark's credit and the team's credit, up until my entry 6 months ago, was that a lot of the underpinning work has already been done for this project and for the system in general. We're not trying to figure out elements that other groups are trying to figure out now. We've already done the heavy lift on a lot of that stuff. Partnership with Mitsubishi as a great example. And so it's really incumbent upon us to get the story out. But I think if I were to be honest with you, Nicole, the nickel market as a whole right now is probably the biggest overhang for us.
There's a flip side to that, however, which is that, timing is very hard to call. But this is at or close to the bottom of the nickel market. And I want to point out that when when we decided to go looking for a new CEO, we found exactly the person we were looking for in Scott. But from Scott's side, I think he's pretty smart because he entered into this thing at what he thinks is the bottom of the nickel market. So his entry point is the bottom, and I think that his perception is something that any patient capital, any patient investors will appreciate. Buy it when it's cheap, and then just, you don't know the timing, but this is a cyclical business. Nickel goes up, nickel goes down.
Well, speaking of timing, let's go back to Turnagain.
And Nicole, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yep. No, please. No, I know that's absolutely. Mark's hit it right on the head, so that's great. Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Going back to Turnagain, we know that we can't time the market, but there are things we can prep for, right? So what are the key milestones that you are maybe keeping front of mind? Do you have timing for, let's say, a DFS? Any steps towards production? What are you looking at next?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing I would say to that, Nicole, is that the partner process is first and foremost for us. We've talked about environmental assessments. We've talked about going to feasibility. These are expensive programs, particularly for a company of our size. And they're something that would be very unlikely for us to do on a standalone basis. So for us, the partnership discussions are first and foremost in that respect. When we add on the prospectivity of the attic zone and what that could do for the dynamics of Turnagain in terms of shaping and framing how that project is developed, that just throws a nice problem at us in terms of how we sort of envision the project ultimately being developed. But yeah, so the next one, the critical thing for us is the partner, and we are actively engaging on that front. And one of the beauties for Turnagain is that, and for us, is that we can do that 24/7 year round. We don't need seasonality at site to dictate that. So, that's first and foremost. That decision and who we bring in will have a large say in the development path for us. And as you'd expect, we would work closely and hand in hand with that group, and as well as Mitsubishi, obviously. Yeah.
Mark, anything to add?
No, I think Scott's right, and the partnership discussions are something where Scott truly adds value. I mean, his experience with big banks, Standard Chartered, to smaller boutique firms. He's worked with a lot of people. He's even sold a nickel asset in an M&A transaction in the past. So he's got very relevant knowledge and a very relevant book of contacts. So, I mean, I just think, I look at the 6 months where he started. I think he's doing an incredible job, but I also think he's just getting started. Like, just stay tuned.
With your PFS, you're a good guy at the helm here. Speaking of partnerships, we know that in your PFS, it is outlined you have a pretty extensive CapEx for Turnagain. Kind of safe to assume we're looking at partners and strategic alliances to fund that as well?
Yeah, I mean, and we talk about this quite a bit, Nicole, internally at least, is that the nature of Turnagain, because it's polymetallic, because it's long-lived, we have a variety of potential capital solutions available to us. First and foremost would be a partner who is skilled in open pit mining, because that's what, and ultimately, however this takes shape, that's what this is going to be. But we also have, as Mark pointed out, infrastructure groups that would want to help potentially assist with power and roads, private equity groups, other institutions. We can talk about the royalty and streaming groups as well. The nature of Turnagain does offer us a multitude of opportunities there. So that's how I would say to that. I mean, the partnership is going to be the critical thing though for us.
So we also know that the concentrate you guys are producing is high grade, low impurity. Has the company had any offtake interest from smelters or any battery material companies?
I can speak to that because I've been around for some of that. A lot of the initial interest from the car makers was for offtake, but I pointed out to them that, look, we could write you a great offtake agreement, and you could give us a nice big fat check. But the fact is that at this stage, of development, offtake is a burden. And so whoever is going to ultimately build this mine will see an offtake agreement as a burden. And it's sort of like catch-22. It gets in the way of actually getting the mine built. It's just not, offtake is something for later in the process, honestly. And, I mean, we could have just ignored all that and just taken the big check, but it just would, ultimately, I want to see this mine built. So I don't want to play games that way.
Exactly. Yeah, and Nicole, to that point, I mean, the work we're doing in the attic zone actually makes that not necessarily more complicated, but does change the dynamics around that in terms of how we see this project be developed. So, and as Mark alluded to, that could be an impediment, putting an offtake agreement on now when we don't fully know the potential of this.
Well, you said before, we can't time the market. We can plan the best that we can, but this leads to my last question is, let's play like pie in the sky envisioning here is, how would you envision Giga's role in the battery metal supply chain as this all plays out in an ideal world?
Well, given Mark's longevity with the company, I would defer to his first opinion on this, but.
Well, I mean, there really isn't much of a battery supply chain in North America. And, Scott talked earlier about, one of our, technical people, Lyle Tritton, who's ex-Sherritt. And Lyle is an extractive metallurgist, but he's a chemical engineer by training. And he knows quite a lot about every step from the mine to the cathode. And, one of the optional things about our deposit is that the concentrate we produce is really, really, a beautiful concentrate for a smelter to buy. It's just ideal for a smelter, and they will pay a premium, I think, for it, although that's not reflected in our PFS. But also, if you wanted to process it directly to the cathode supply chain, it responds beautifully to pressure oxidation. And, you could create either nickel sulfate or nickel and cobalt sulfate, or you can create a combined mixed hydroxide precipitate, which is right along the supply chain towards the cathode. The part that's missing in North America is taking that sulfate and making it into PCAM. There's no facility in North America to do that. It makes no sense to me to be shipping it to Asia to get it changed to PCAM and then shipping it back. So that's something, there's a complication there. But our material, you could, if you want to think big, you could create a system where you could take our concentrate, put it through pressure oxidation, make sulfate, have a PCAM facility right next door and create PCAM. Now you're creating material directly for the supply chain, and you're keeping that whole thing in North America. The point being that the concentrate we produce is amenable to many different process routes.
Yeah.
And, that's one of them. If you want to go directly to the supply chain, you can do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Nicole, to add to that, I think ultimately what we envision as being a partner in a critical part of that chain. I mean, we won't be building this mine by ourselves, but we will be there as a partnership, as a partner with some or one or more groups. So at the end game will be that we will be a critical element, but maybe a smaller one in that sort of supply chain, whether it's domestically oriented, which could be longer dated, or if it's international.
Well, we love to hear it, guys. We're just about out of time for today's webinar. Any last thoughts from either of you that you want the people on the line here to know about?
I just want to pick up a little bit.
Go ahead, Mark. Yeah.
What Scott was just saying is that, I think that's also Mitsubishi's vision, is they'd like to get a supply chain set up for batteries in North America. And so you would have a different partner that would come in, perhaps to do the pressure oxidation and also to move it along to PCAM and then sell it to the battery manufacturers. So you could have, it's a big project, you could have several different partners involved in various stages of the processing towards the cathode.
Yeah, and Nicole, to add to that, I mean, just from my perspective, 2020, I would say that 2026 is going to be a continuation of what's been a busy H2 in 2025. And I think we'll have no shortage of opportunities to work and to bring in and bring sort of new partners to the table, both within Giga and as part of the Hard Creek joint venture.
Well, it sounds like we have lots to catch up on in the next few months. We'll keep a tab on you, and everyone can follow on social.
Absolutely.
Head to the website. Make sure you're subscribing to their email list as well. Thank you all for joining us live, for all of your questions that have been coming through. Again, head over to gigametals.com. The replay for this webinar will be there, as well as their contact page where you can get in touch with the company directly. Mark, Scott, it was great to host you, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks.
Thanks very much, everyone.